welcome to this episode of The Archive, where we strive to tell interesting LARP stories and preserve LARP history. I am your host, St. Godric, and today I am pleased to welcome the Version 9 Committee. But before we jump into that, I want to get all the housekeeping stuff out of the way so that way we can have a good episode where I don't have to drop annoying plugs throughout the whole thing. So if you're watching this live or watching the recording later, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. Does really help out the channel as a whole. We really appreciate all of our viewers and really appreciate my guest here with me tonight. So before we jump into any of the hard-hitting V9 questions, let's do a little bit of introduction. If you guys could just go around and let me know your name, where you play, and what your job or your role is on the team. Wunjo?
Hi, I'm Sir Wunjo. I am from the Kingdom of the Nine Blades, and I am the acting director of the V9 Development Committee.
Cool. Manama?
Hi, my name is Manama Proster. I'm from the Rising Winds. I'm currently the Rules Rep organizer and part of the V9 committee and in that form.
Cool. And Cord?
Hi, I'm Cord. I play out of the Iron Mountains. Also on the V9 committee, as you know, I would expect for everybody who's on the show. And I was also one of the members of the V8 committee previously, so I'm the continuity guy. All right.
Awesome. And Goravan?
I'm Goravan. I play out of Cyrandil in Kingdom of Goldenvale, and I'm the new guy. I'm the one who hasn't played for as long, and I've got that newer player perspective.
Awesome. So viewers, as you are watching, if you have any questions for our team today, feel free, throw those down in the comments below. And towards the end of the episode, we will be able to pull your questions up for them to answer. So if you have any questions specifically about V9 or through anything that comes up in conversation here, throw those down below. And if I like the question, I will pose it to our team here. So to start with, how come we're getting a version 9, guys? Why don't we just get another like V8.2 or 8.4, or why don't we just continue it on like we did with the other ones? Why are we getting a V9 anyway?
I think maybe Cord and Manama could answer that best since they were the originators.
So me and Cord actually separately started our own little like exploration committees. So what happened is that I forget what year it was. I think it was like 2018. It was in the middle of the moratorium where we couldn't, do changes, and it was just getting up for the next year. And I was rules representative for Rising Winds, and there was a lot of animosity, especially in my kingdom. But even at Keeping the Borderlands, when I talked to people that year, they were just like, what is going on? Like, there's obviously problems. We should be fixing them, right? Like, why are we waiting? And why is it when we've had changes, they've always been really minor, right? Like all the ones that happened before this are very small changes in general or fixes to wording, like extraordinary for barbarian for their brutal strike instead of magic. So they could actually don't have to have a free hand, things like that. So, knowing that and realizing it actually had been a while since we had been out, and at the same time knowing that it would take a while for a version 9 to even take effect, I was like, well, it's usually the same people doing the rules, like, or at least like it seems that way, right? So why don't I actually start an exploration committee where I was going to get representatives from every kingdom together, and we were going to talk about this, and I was going to present that to Serial Monarchs in 2019. And this was the same year that Cord also already had started a committee with some other people too, trying to see about exploring rules changes as well. We talked at Gathering Crowns in New Mexico in person, and at that event decided, okay, let's actually combine the two together. And I kind of dropped off all the people. I had gathered someone from every single kingdom. Like I had at least one person from every kingdom in my group, and we're kind of but it was too many voices. So we dropped down to a smaller group with the combined two committees. I brought in Wunjo and Goravan, and then realized that I didn't have enough time as Role Rep organizer to do the V9 committee as well as everything else, and just for personal life in general. And Wunjo, we thought was be the best person to actually run the committee at the time. So I just transferred leadership, but me and Cord kind of transferred leadership, kind of like organization to Wunjo, and then now we're just part of the committee and helping. That is the history of how that came about to be, and the reason, at least, why I did it. I don't know, Cord, did you have a different reason why you wanted to explore V9 as well?
Well, I think for me, the primary reason why I was looking to explore V9 was I felt like V8 was a pretty solid system. But I know there was a lot of frustration in certain areas about the inability to change things. And I know when V8 came into effect, AmpGuard was kind of change averse because V7 was something that changed somewhat drastically almost every year. And so there was the idea that, okay, we've got V8, we've got this good solid system. Let's just go ahead and keep it that way. And so that's when the moratorium came in. But I kept hearing rumblings across the game about different aspects of V8 that they thought really could use some adjustment and that sort of thing. And as time went on, those rumblings got more and more vocal. And so by the time we actually got to, I think it was 2018, at that point, I felt like there was enough complaints and enough problems that people had identified within V8 that it was really time to start looking at trying to fix those problems. And part of the problem I feel like we had with V7 was that we did this patchwork approach. So we had V7 as the baseline, and then we fixed this thing right here. We tweaked this thing right here. And whenever you have a game that just has constant patches, eventually you end up breaking things because those patches don't really take everything else into consideration. And so I felt like V9 we needed to look at a new version so that we could actually take everything into consideration and not necessarily just throw V8 out, but look at it across the entire spectrum of the game and see what aspects we wanted to adjust, what we wanted to keep, etc. But instead of fixing small areas, do a really wide scope. So that was the reason why I started a group to do so. And then, as Craig just basically said, or as Manama just said, yeah, that's pretty much how everything happened beyond that.
No, that makes a lot of sense because I know I play League of Legends a whole lot, and they patch it throughout and will fix individual champions or individual issues, but then every season they do the major system changes, and those happen on a much less or a more infrequent basis. Those just don't happen as often, and so I think that makes a lot of sense. V7 had a lot of patches, but not a whole lot of systematic changes. And then V8 came around and then just kind of took a different approach going into V8 now, going into V9. So Gorvan, can you tell me a little bit about what goes into making a new version? Like what is the process from bird's eye view? I know nothing about this process at all. Give me the TLDR. How do we even get a new, what's the process look like?
Really put me on the spot here. Yeah. So the process that we've kind of set up for ourselves is that because our mandate from the Circle of Monarchs is to have a data-driven development process, our first phase was very much data collection, surveying, a lot of figuring out where we're at with V8 and where people would like to see V9 go. And then we've moved into our phase 2, which is our field research program, which is talking about doing small changes to just see where our tuning levers are for V8 and what we were doing what's called limit testing, seeing if this breaks, what else breaks, things like that. And then using all of that data from the surveys and then the learning experiences we've gained from the field research program and using that to draft the strongest alpha we can use as a starting point. And from there, we'll move into more pocket play testing, open play testing, and eventually full launch.
Do we have a rough ETA yet, or is it still way too early for all of that?
There is a full timeline. It is a lot of information you can find at ampguard.com/V9. The timeline itself, right now, we are penciled in for at GOTC 2024 being the vote to officially change over to V9. So as far as playtesting goes, a year before that, so 2023 is when we hope to have open playtesting. And this year, either at GOTC or a bit later, depending on how the pandemic plays out, because obviously that's affecting things, is when we're going to be doing closed alpha testing. So we'll have a very rough version, and parks who want to opt in can get their hands on that and start giving us some feedback.
When did V8 come out? It was 2012, 2013, right?
V8 was 2010 was when we first started building it, and 2014 was the official vote. So basically December 31st of 2014 was the last day of V7.
Okay. So roughly 10 years. I feel like that's a pretty good lifespan for a rule book. How long was V7 around? Do we know?
V7, I think, got voted in officially in 2005, was it?
Okay. That tracks. That's right about the same. That's not bad. Do you think that the rules revision process, should Amtgard just institute a timeline for this? Every 5 years, we're going to start this. Every 3 years, we're going to do this. Or do you like it? Do you want it to be more just as we need it, don't regulate it and let it go as it comes?
So this is something I can speak on, right? Because like the rules revision process is kind of what caused us to look at this, right? Because when there are problems, you run into a problem where small tweaks can cause changes to other things, right? So when you're playtesting, if the Circle of Monarchs votes for a change, they're not going to go and R&D like something that happened that was wrong with that change, right? Like say, okay, this affected this other thing that we didn't anticipate. They're just going to cut it, or they're going to think about it and realize that might actually change it and then just vote no, right? So it's hard to make rules revision process changes for a lot of things. You have to have like, this is like a no-brainer change to do something, and it's usually minor tweaks. Like the example of scout change, right? We just made it chargeable to spell, right? That's a very small change. I would say the biggest changes we've had are the upcoming changes to Paladin and Anti-Paladin, which you can see previewed right now in a lot of different places. And those are actually the largest changes I've seen the rules reps do. And part of that was me actually doing a guided process where I'm like, okay, what do you think is wrong and what could we change? All right, guys, put those ideas down. All right, now let's talk about how you can put this together as a package, and Heron was actually instrumental in actually writing it up to make it look like it did. And they debated it back and forth, and they did some small tweaks to what it says to get the version you had. And that type of R&D process, right? You need to have like people on board, active every week or so, working towards like doing that kind of thing. And we just don't have that at Amtgard with the current rules revision process. So obviously doing a new version of the rules is nice because we as a group will then be able to just overhaul all these systems kind of at once and then put the package in front of people and say, this is it. Yes or no, right? You don't have to like debate individual details as much. And so people are like, well, generally speaking, this is really good, so we're going to vote yes. That's the type of thing that we want to go for. And in general, the rules are good. But when it comes to the actual revision process, right, you can't do that. You're going to debate minor minutia. And so it's something that I'm going to talk about to the Circle of Monarchs actually later this year, is talking about how a vision of like what I would like to see the rules revision process going into V9 changing to what it is. And because this is a rule book change, it's in the rule book. It's not an award standardization. It's not something the Circle of Monarchs controls directly. The rules reps actually control what that says. So the rules reps determine how the rules are changed in the first place as far as they vote on it, and the Circle of Monarchs can approve it, but it only needs to require 75%, unlike, some of the other changes that we need.
Yeah.
So my hope is to be a 3-year cycle. Like where you actually do play testing, you find out what's wrong, you do some fixes, tweaks, and then you get you do a 3-year thing. Ideas, play testing, do the thing, which is kind of what we're doing right now with V9. But it would allow us to actually make better changes because we see what's wrong or things that we can do as a group. And then also I would like to see a V9 committee stay on, like basically like their advisory at that point, and they can talk about the rules, and they can talk to the rules reps and say, this was our idea when we designed this, blah, blah, blah. So they actually have a better idea of how to change the rules possibly and can get some more information. So that is my hope for the rules revision process going forward once, V9 is in place. Because right now I think that it's really hard to make changes, and good changes especially. So,
well, I could see it setting up. It's like, okay, on the every 5 years you do something. So 2025, it gets voted in. At 2030, we're automatically going to start the process for the next rule book. We're going to vote on it 2035. And you make, is there a world in which we standardize how long a version is around? Or is it better just to let it, when we need it, and then kind of let the people decide, and we shouldn't regulate it way down the road? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like organically is probably a better call. And the reason why I say that is, like, for the first part of Amtgard, revisions happened actually relatively quickly. We went through 6 versions before we actually got to 1995-ish, 94, 93, somewhere in there, when V6 first came out. And then V6 has been was the longest running version. But I think game theory and game design really evolves potentially pretty rapidly. And so depending on what new concepts come out of that, that could really accelerate the need for us to shift Amped Guard toward a new game design paradigm. Or, if game design stays, kind of constant, at that point, little tweaks may be all that's necessary for it. So I'd prefer to play it by ear. I think in general, it sounds like we're kind of seeing this almost once every 10 years, like kind of time frame. But I wouldn't want to have to hold us to that, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it is, kind of,
like an expected shelf life, right? So
yeah,
exactly what Cord said, right? You kind of at around 10 years, you can be like, okay, it's had a run. How's it doing? And if everyone's jiving with it, then let it play out.
Yeah,
right?
Let it run.
But I also think it's good to have that maybe in the back of everyone's head, so it's not like, oh, V9's been out for 2 years and now we have a V10 team already chomping at the bit, right?
Not a big fan of planned obsolescence. Sorry, go ahead.
I think also what Man was talking about, having a healthier revision cycle can help contribute to having a longer, like what you were saying about shelf life of the rule set, of like, if you can make whatever minor changes are necessary or major changes are necessary, whatever ends up being needed means that the game can stay in a major revision for longer.
And actually, if I could speak directly to that, one of the things that we're hoping to do with V9 is try to set up, really fix some of the underlying engine, problems, so that the revision cycle that like Manama is talking about can benefit, right? Because, if you're 3 years or 4 years or 5 years into an edition, doing something like completely overhauling armor, that's a big deal. That's going to change a lot, right? That's something that if we're going to do now for V9, if people are like, oh, stuff is changing. Oh, look at this all changed. But so those are the things we want to make sure we nail properly. The cost and level placement of each individual spell, that stuff we can patch and tweak and do, mid edition.
One of the things that the game developers of Teamfight Tactics, which is another game that I love, they talk about as they have implemented new system changes and new seasons that they've had to learn to do is implement more possible levers to pull. So that way, when they're doing the patches, they can pull the levers easier. And if you have more levers that your game designers can then adjust to bring things in balance, the shelf life extends longer because they've got more to play with without having to overhaul the entire system, if that makes sense. I have no idea how that would work out in Amped Guard, but I like the theory.
So I think it is an sorry, go ahead.
No, by all means, take it.
I was going to say, I think it is an interesting theory, but one of the things that we have to keep in mind with regard to Amped Guard is games like League of Legends, that sort of thing, any of those, they're online. Okay. They have the ability to break physics with no real concerns. And so we're building a game that also has the constraints of like physics and reality that we have to keep in mind. And so that actually places some limitations on the levers that we can pull. It doesn't necessarily mean we don't have the ability to build all of those additional levers, but the amount of freedom we have is kind of constrained there just a little bit. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
The example that I always give people, because we often get compared to League of Legends, we get compared to D&D, and we get compared to, sports. And the difference between all of those is we have a lot that is not only imaginary, but needs to be processed by kind of this hive mind of players. Right? In a real sport, everything is visual. Did the ball go the place? Did the player hit the other player? In D&D, it's turn-based, right? You can take all the time you want to figure out something that's complex, right? Everyone's played the 3-hour, combat that actually took 5 minutes in real life. And then League of Legends obviously has actual AI processing. So you can do all these little levers, all these little tweaks, damage over time, buffs, debuffs in an instant. And no one needs to think about it. They just go, oh, why don't I have control? Oh, I'm dead. Okay. And they didn't have to think about it. In Amped Guard, they have to think about that. So if a player doesn't know they're dead, they're not dead. Right. If something's too complex, they don't have time to stop and go, okay, carry the one. What does this do? Hey, Reeve, can we check this? Can we look at the book? It's in the... So trying to make our levers match with that is very tricky. So a lot of our discussion right now is trying to put the complexity either on the user or pre-game, right? Mm-hmm. Stuff like spell point systems, archetypes, all that all happens pre-game. Once you're on the field, I don't need to know, how much did your spell cost? Right. That's like next level complexity if I want to reverse engineer your spell list. But for the most part, the average Joe doesn't need to know that. So those are the limitations that we're working with lever wise. Hope that helped.
Oh yeah, I like that a lot. We've been talking a little bit about some of the difficulties that our game as a whole has compared to other games, tabletop or video game. What do you guys think? What has been the most difficult part for you guys? Cord, and this can go back to previous versions as well if you would like. But when it comes to just developing a game for Amtgard, a rule set for Amtgard, what's the most difficult part that goes into it?
I'll go ahead and go first. So, sorry. So, having been on the V8 committee and then also on the V9 committee, I think the most difficult part is getting buy-in from the rest of the game. So, one of the things that we found as part of the surveys is Amtgard has a wide variety of opinions on pretty much everything.
No.
Yeah, no kidding. And while on a lot of these topics there was agreement, quote unquote, that agreement was only in rare instances really extreme. Like, 80% of Amtgard agrees with X. So what we got was a slight majority in one area and then a slight minority in a completely different direction. And so trying to find a way to build a game that not only recognizes that the majority of people want this, but that a slight minority of people may actually walk away from the game if they don't, if we don't go their direction, is where it's really a struggle to try and find that balance.
I'm going to tangent. How many issues do you think are a player will walk away from the game issues? Is that 4 things you're having to deal with? Is that 400 things you're having to deal with? How many issues are big enough deals that you're going to lose players on if you change it?
How big of a thing can we define as a thing?
I've basically been trying to think about it, and I describe this often as like an anger meter. So it's not like any one thing will cause people to leave, but it is if any one person has too much stuff that hits a nerve for them, that's when they go, all right, they changed this and that, I'm out of here. Right. So we just need to be cognizant of the pressure points in the community. And that's where our surveys have really helped us, because we can see where all the passionate crowds are. And we know, like, okay, if we're going to do something big here, we either have to, throw a bone over here or offset it, or at least not tackle both of these at the same time. Right. While also still trying to make something that still advances the game and isn't just, appeasing the audience.
So to go after what Wonju just said too, you have to understand, like, we gave people a scale, right, in the surveys. It wasn't just yes or no. It was how much do you like this? So we can see sometimes when it's like kind of like, okay, about 25% said they really like this. 25% said they're okay if this is a thing. 25, but then if it says like 10% said we're not okay with it, and then like a huge amount of people are like, we're definitely not okay with this, even though the majority said yes, but we have this large group that says no. Those are the ones we have to watch, right? Like you said, is those are potentially anger points that we have to go in, but we can see those at least. We don't have just yes or no questions. We have a span of numbers to look at so that we can see, like, okay, and then we can start asking specific questions then when it comes to design, like, okay, what about this? Why do you not like this, right? And we have some of those comments already, but we can also still ask those questions too later on.
If I may, one of the spots that I don't want to say it pains me, but it's definitely a hurdle, is the fact that a lot of people have a hard time, or appear to have a difficult time, realizing that Amtgard is not only a PvP game, but also one that doesn't have matchmaking. right? We play with whoever shows up to our park. And that means that you're having all these people with different desires and different skill levels coming together, and they have to play against each other, right? D&D has the benefit of it's your party against nameless NPCs. You can be as overpowered as you want, have fun, dick around with them, and it's all in good fun. You can't do that in Amtgard. And there's a lot of, in our surveys, you see people who are saying, I really like this ability because it's super strong. And then in the exact same survey, that person will be like, I hate being affected by this same ability. It's absolutely, garbage. You should remove this. And it's the same person for the same ability. It's because people want to feel powerful, but they don't want to feel that power wielded against them. And then matchmaking wise, again, people want it to be like League of Legends, but League of Legends pairs people with equal skill so you can have a more balanced experience. It really sucks when you show up at field and hey, my park has 3 warlords. This is how it is here, right? Or my park is 10 druids deep. We'll never have enough dispels. Yeah.
I get that for sure. The matchmaking part, I have the dream. I think it would be so cool, but I don't see a way where that's even feasible.
Outside of tournaments, I would absolutely agree.
Yeah, because I look at like the most fun that I ever have at Amtgard generally are at tournaments, like when my company and Manima's company were fighting each other at Bridge Wars. Like those are the top 10 that each of us can put forward, and you've got a similar skill set, and like you can go back and forth. That's so fun. But like what you were saying, in a normal everyday show up on a Saturday and play Amtgard, that's not feasible. So how do you develop a game around that? I like that. So back on, I got Cord's most difficult part of making it. Manima, what's the most difficult part about writing a rulebook?
Balancing people's emotions, right? Like this game is not just about the rule set. It's also about the culture that we have, right? And the people that are in it. Some people are only in this game because the people they play with. Some people are only in this game because of the other systems that are in place, right? But they still play the game. They still play with the rules. So kind of like what Wanju said, like having those anger points stacking on top of each other. Some people are already angry about things not related to the rules. So, you have to make sure that, like our job is to balance game design, right? And so part of that is going to be not just the balancing the technical ability of people to play our game, but it's also going to be about the emotional aspect of it too. How you reave people, right? Like right now our reaving section is pretty minimal, right? About how you actually reave. And we kind of trust our reaves to do the job that's going to be to calm people down, to de-escalate situations where there's problems, right? And stuff like that is a good thing to have on the field where we actually support kind of like people, but definitely going through people's emotions, perceptions on how abilities works and versus how they actually work, is always a problem. That's why playtesting is always necessary, because it looks good on paper, plays bad, and vice versa. It looks bad on paper, but it actually plays perfectly fine. All those things are going to be hard to fight, especially with an online culture. Like when VA came out, Facebook was becoming a thing. It was starting to become a main communication for some kingdoms, but it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of interconnectivity between kingdoms, I would say. People were either on the VA, they were pretty much on their kingdom and their park page, and they were on the VA page if they were in on that. But now we are very interconnected. There's lots of discords, there's a lot of private chats. People talk about the rules a lot offline and off the field. And if they see something they don't like, it's possible that they think that's actually what the rules say, so we have to not just balance like what we're writing on paper, but we also have to balance like what people think that we're writing on paper too, without actually knowing what it is. So it's definitely going to be, that I think is going to be a very difficult process and one thing we're going to have to look out for.
So far,
a lot in the surveys was people being like, I don't like this one rule because of XYZ. I'm like, well, that's not what the rule is. And so it's this thing of like, if you're upset because like you thought that anything that's armor breaking is inherently wounds kill. And it's not. I'm like, okay, cool. We already fixed that for you. Good job, us. Like, we didn't have to change anything. But like, there's all these issues of, because so many people learn the rules from word of mouth, or just from just by having played multiple editions and having the wrong rule set, or just from not like reading cover to cover and having the absolute technical knowledge. It just, they read their class and everything else they learn on the field. There's a different conception, like what Wunjo was saying earlier about how video games can change something and it immediately goes into effect. And also, we have to keep up with the expectations, not just of what people think the rules are based on what we wrote, but what people think the rules are based on what we didn't write, or what was written in a different version, or what was in a different game, stuff like that.
A good example of that is the rule where if you lose an arm and then you take another hit to the arm, to this day, there are still people who think that if you take a second hit to the arm, like a dead arm, it counts as a torso shot, right? And that's because that's just how it's been passed via word of mouth, and no one bothered to check it up. And, so even now in V8, like almost 10 years after its launch, there are still people who are playing that way, and they'll write to us being like, I don't think it should be like this. And we're like, well, it's not. Like, happy birthday.
I think that's actually one of the areas in V8 where we kind of erred a little bit. V7 had so many things that were just vague and ambiguous, right? So when we wrote V8, we attempted to do so as unambiguous as possible, and we didn't even get there. But the way we wrote it was so technical in many instances that it made it really difficult for people to understand by actually reading it. And so they had to have people explain it to them. And the people who explained it to them didn't necessarily understand it either, or had a prior conception or something like that. So there's a lot of that we have to deal with. So, it's going to be a real challenge for us, I think, trying to figure out how to write it so everybody can understand it, but in also a way that's clear and unambiguous and doesn't allow for, these gray areas and whatnot. So that's another one of the real challenges, I think.
It really limits our ability to make small changes, because if the change is too small, people won't notice it was made. Even if we announce it, right? You read this paragraph, if it's literally the exact same thing, except one word is switched, and that is actually an important change, but to them it reads the same, right? So we have to make large enough steps that they are visual, which is tricky.
No, for sure. I can't tell you how many times I still hear people say, we've been, like we said, almost 10 years into this now. Oh, well, in V7, it was... right. And that's still whatever it is on the field. And I even still get a few people that are like, well, in V6, it was, those aren't too popular, not too common, but like V7 stuff. And I can just imagine how it's going to be going into another one where people are still going to be like, I talk to people who are still, V8 is still, we are learning the new edition. You know what I mean? And so it's like, man, you guys are we got a whole other edition coming out. Like, y'all are way behind if you're just now learning V8. So I want to move on to another question on writing V9. Do you guys go into it with the mindset of we're going to fix this and tweak little things? Or do you go into it with a mindset of we're blowing everything up and starting over? Or is it somewhere in between? How do you kind of approach the rule book?
So this is probably a good place for me to mention something that we recently did. We just finished over the December break. We took a month off where we weren't doing any meetings during December, but we had a bit of homework, so to speak, where each of us independently took a look at the data that we had collected over the past year and a half and went, what do we think V9 looks like? And so I think each of us came at your question in a different way.
Okay.
But that collectiveness is how we are going about tackling V8, right? That's fair. So some of us are starting at V8 and taking kind of like the approach coming up this way. Some of us are seeing like what is the outer bounds, and then we'll work back towards the middle. And so in theory, we're going to trickle into something that is realistic, kind of in a nice comfort zone, right? Wherever that may play out based on stuff. Does that sound about right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. But I think one of the things to keep in mind is we know where Amtgard is, at least we know where the majority of Amtgard is. We don't know where everyone is, but that helps kind of temper some of those expectations. Like, we can't just say, all right, well, we just need minor tweaks to V8, because most people don't want that. But we also can't say, all right, throw it out and let's just start from scratch, because there wasn't enough real desire for just chuck it out the window and start anew. So I think that kept us in a decent range of each other, even if we did have those different mentalities coming in.
I've used a car analogy a couple times, being like, hey, we are getting a new car, right? Let's say we're driving a Civic right now, right? If we still like the Civic, or we want like a higher model of Civic, cool, we can buy a new Civic. But the old Civic, right, where we're kind of getting rid of, we are getting something new, specifically when it comes to like the internals, the technology, right? I'm not going to have a tape deck anymore, right? That kind of thing. And we want to modernize it because, like Manama said, when V8 came out, Facebook was on the up, right? Everyone was getting onto Facebook. Facebook's a thing. Now we're coming into V9. Facebook is on the out, right? We don't know where we're gonna end up next. What's the social system going to be like 5 years from now, right? 10 years from now. So we have to kind of have a little bit of forethought when it comes to that, to make sure we're not planting our roots somewhere that everyone's going to be moving away from, or, in a metaphorical swamp.
I think also what you're saying about like the degree of blow it up and start new versus build off what's there before. That was one of the most common question types we had in our surveys, was like, how much change do you want to see in this specific area, this really specific area, and overall? And so that way we have this guidance on like, this subsystem of the game is pretty okay. It could use some work, but it's a nice starting point. This one doesn't work. We need to try and find something new. And this one, everyone loves it, but we still have some room for improvement. And so that's like our like guideline of not just the entire system, but specific subsystems, as well as like specific mechanics that might either need work or might need replacing.
I gotcha. That makes sense. So I know you guys haven't made any final decisions, but coming off of your homework in December, what are you guys most excited about? Like, when you're sitting here, like you're getting giddy, if you can tell me, what are you excited about going into this next stage? I'm
excited about something that I kind of like has been a passion of mine. I know Wonju is also on board for this, a role playing system that's not just 2 pages in our rule book that talk about relics and quest, like quest items and quest abilities, and that's it, right? I'm not saying that it would be part of like your normal battle gaming experience, but having some guidance so that when quest makers make a quest, they have things to work with that everyone knows about, so they can expect players to show up with X abilities, but expect players to show up with X things, and then the questers know that they're looking for things to interact with that deal with these abilities. It's almost to be like a supplement to the rule book, but because it wouldn't be part of, like I said, your normal battle gaming, unless you just always do quest, and then you could obviously use it. But me and Wonju both had things that we talked about how we wanted to see as far as role play, and as far as getting people into that want to do those types of things, giving them a system that they can actually do it in, as on top of the battle gaming part of it. So I'm really looking forward to that, because that kind of design is going to be kind of new, right? It's not something that we have currently, and it's going to be, I think, something that a lot of people will hopefully enjoy once we get some playtesting out there and get some feedback.
I'll follow up on that, basically echoing the same thing. There's a couple things maybe that are undiscussed that I'm not going to say I'm more excited about, but that are shinier. But as far as stuff that I can talk about right now, like Manama said, what he's referring to, or at least what I'm going to talk about, is something currently we're calling the GOG, or the Game Organizer Guide, which the idea is it's like a DMG for Amtgard that isn't rules per se, but it's guidance for all the aspects that are currently severely under-supported right now. So Reeves, game organizers, Roleplay, because we lean so much on our Smiths, on our Reeves to actually execute the game. And if you watched my GOTC report last year, I had a whole big section about this where people are just saying like, hey, like we want people to, our players want good stuff to be run, but there's no support for the people who are running those things. We have rules that are saying, oh, it's at the Reeves' discretion, but half of our Reeves are only Reeves because they didn't feel like playing that day. So how do you put that much responsibility on Joe Bob who showed up late and is standing there with like a slushie and a slice of pizza? And right, you're just like, oh, what is this complex maneuver? And he's just like, I don't know. Follow your heart, right? So we, the GOG, ideally will open people's eyes, hopefully, to a support system and maybe encourage some folks to feel more empowered going down those roads to make the game better.
I made this comment when you went on the WAC podcast. I said, if the GOG is the game organizers, we need the Magog, which should be the monster manual. I think that would be super funny. But Gorvad, what are you most excited about? What are you most giddy about going into the next step of this?
Two things. On a personal level, I'm a complete rules nerd, as are we all, but I love the whole like getting a new system to play with and be able to like keyword stuff, be like proofreading. Like that's my jam. I'm really looking forward to that. But in terms of like what like system of V9 I'm excited about, I really am excited about class customization. We really haven't nailed down a lot of specifics of how it's going to work, but one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got on the surveys was that people wanted customization options for every class. They wanted to be able to pick the way their class worked on some level, some degree, whether it's archetypes or point buy or something. We haven't figured out anything concrete, but there's going to be something. And I'm excited for whatever form that ends up taking.
So I'll go ahead and pause you here for all of the questions that we will get. The what about X class down here? He just said they're not 100% sure yet. So we'll get that one out of the, are you going to nerf Druid? Hopefully. Are you going to buff Paladin? Maybe. All of those are completely up in the air. No idea yet.
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, so a little bit of tangent on that is like the standard disclaimer, as Winjo puts it, is like everything we say is subject to change as the development process happens. And so like, if we say X is X now, and we come across in playtesting that X can't be X for some reason, we're not going to be like, well, we said it on the podcast. It's got to be that way. Like, we're going to make whatever decision is best for the game.
Of course.
So I think that in terms of like where we're at in our design process, we're really working on making sure we're getting a solid foundation for the whole system before we really dive into like technical minutia of things like how many points does this ability cost? What's the frequency? What's the incantation? We're talking more system level things.
I got you.
And so because we're working on those system level things, I can't say like, oh, well, this ability is going to cost 5 points at 6th level because we haven't gotten there yet. Like we're probably going to have 6 levels as our top, the highest level. Probably. I don't know.
Well, that's one of the things you guys were talking about when you went on the WAC podcast was literally everything is on the table, which I think is fascinating. Like 6 levels sounds great because that's what we've always had, but that doesn't inherently mean we're changing it, but it doesn't inherently mean we're keeping it either. If there's a better system that the collective group thinks would be more fun, go for it. I think that's pretty cool. Cord, what are you most excited about going forward?
So having actually gone through this process with V8, and it's been a pretty substantially different process, but for me, it's a little different. It's fixing my mistakes. So like, I feel like V8 was miles beyond V7. Okay. I feel like we did a really good job there, but there's always this certain personal like, oh man, we screwed that up. and there's that frustration there. So the ability to find those instances and help fix them is one of the things I'm really looking forward to. And then screwing up so many more times so that the 10 can actually come through.
It's one of those, I'm going to purposely leave this in here because I got to let the next guy fix it, right? Someone's got to get paid to do it. Wait.
I wish.
So going into the viewer questions here, before we get to any of those, if any of the things that the viewers put in here are just earth shattering, are just, man, this is a great idea, you love it, the audience loves it, where can people be submitting ideas? Where can they be contacting you all? What is the best way for someone who's watching this, who has an idea, they want to get it in front of you all? What does that process look like?
So, the entire portal to contact with us in every different initiative to stay up to date is ampguard.com/V9. If you want to directly message us and talk with us, if you're on Facebook, look at the AmpGuard V9 Facebook group, click the message button and talk with us there. Or you can send an email to v9@ampguard.com if that's your style. There's also all the surveys that are online right now, which you can fill out based on each individual class. So if you have class-specific ideas, do those surveys if you haven't already.
Cool. So let's jump in, audience. If you want to throw your questions into the chat, I will be pulling them up on screen here. The ones that I like or appreciate the most. Just because you type it in doesn't mean I'm screening these. How about that? I'm screening these for our friends here. But first one, Manama, what are some of the things from V8 that you're going to keep?
Well, I mean, we just kind of touched on that. Like, classes will exist. We haven't gotten that far into the process to really nail down, like, we're for 100%, going to keep this system in place as is with no changes, right? Or even like this system with minimal changes, right? If we looked at the survey data, people are generally speaking really okay with the way that the current like hit system works. For the most part. So as far as like, I think that was like the top rated, like, we're okay with this thing that we had in our surveys. So if you're going to go with at least one thing that probably won't change that much, it's at least, how you get hit by swords.
The science of whack.
Yeah, the science of whack.
The one thing we have in common with all of the other Boffer games. We're good with that one.
Correct. Like the only things that you could possibly think about are like, maybe when taking a leg. Like we just changed in V8 recently, right? How somebody, if they're legged and you get shoved, right? How does that work? We're allowing people now to stand up, go back to 20 feet and come back down. They cannot defend themselves while they're doing this, type of thing, or they cannot attack people while they're doing it. There's restrictions like that, obviously, that can be minor tweaks. But as far as like, the actual hit system, it'd be really, really hard pressed to do any major changes there. So
we've got classes are staying, we've got hitting people is staying, but pretty much everything else is a maybe at this point.
I didn't say specific classes. I said the idea of classes.
Okay.
I don't know about classes.
Okay.
Who knows? We may just throw those out and go full sandbox. Everything's on the table.
V9 will be a class-based wacky bat game.
Man, you just give me like 50 points of point buy, and then armor costs different things, and I would love that. But I think that's, for me personally, that would be super fun, but it makes the competitive side of it difficult if I don't know what the other people have.
And
but
I think game designers would hate that.
Oh yeah.
As a min-maxer, I would adore it, but I think for overall,
as the guy who went into a battle game with like 48 poisons per life, like, I'm fine with that. I could just get more.
I love it. All right. Cord, what are some of the core problems with V8 that you're looking to address? You were talking about some of those, trying to rectify mistakes. What are a couple of those?
Oh, okay. How much time have I got? So
take all the time you need, Fred.
So I think, from my perspective, one of the things is we went into V8 with kind of the concept of almost a paper, rock, scissors kind of thought process, where there's classes have counters to each other, etc. And I think in coming out of V8, that's actually been it's been less successful than we really wanted, because the thought process was, well, if you have a druid on the field, you're going to want somebody who has the spells, right? Sure. I mean, ideally, if you're playing the game with the intent of just winning, that's the standard strategy. But people don't want to play the class that has dispels. They want to play the assassin who can, disappear into the night. So the counters aren't necessarily there. And I think one of the things that we did was made some classes a little too strong if the counter wasn't necessarily available. Druid.
We were all thinking it.
I know. I did see somebody, somebody in there said, you're going to nerf Druid. And I mean, I don't know, but
made my night right there. That's all I need to hear. We can check out now,
between
boys.
Druid and the other classes will be narrowed.
Cool.
Whether it's from nerfing Druid, buffing the other classes, changing things.
More aligned, at least. More comparable. I got you. Any other major things from V8 that we were looking to address? And we can open this up to anybody here for this one.
I think all of that's still kind of on the table. Like, there are things that I regret that I'm sure other members of the team are like, you know what, I actually think that works pretty well. And there are things that I think, oh yeah, this is great. And then other members of the team are like, no, get rid of it. Like, this sucks. This is I mean, we're not fully aligned with everything. Luckily, we've got a really good dynamic where we can actually, be critical of those things without anybody taking it personally, which is nice. So yeah, I really don't know how to answer that. Does anybody else have anything that we've all as a group said, oh yeah, that's got to go, or sorry, that's yeah.
I mentioned this previously, but basically complexity and who the complexity is put onto, right? I mentioned before the idea that we're a bunch of meat brains, right? And the processing of our game is only as strong as the weakest, processor on the field. And if you have people who have not even a disability, but just like the way they take in sensory information is different from other people, you can have these, to bring it to a computer term, lag points, right? Where they literally take stuff in and they have to stop because they're overwhelmed. Our surveys came back with like 30% of AmpGuarders are being overwhelmed on the field at least often or very often when they're playing. 40% of people said that they are often being overwhelmed by the amount of sound and noise on the field to the point where they can't pay attention to what's going on. So I think those, while that's not a specific ability like armor or enchantments, right? It's kind of radiating from every part of the rules, and trying to find those little points and nip them down is, I think that's probably a core problem.
Looking at V8 as a whole, personally, that would be one of the things that I would identify if I were in your shoes as well, is the complexity, especially when you get on larger fields, right? When I'm at Keep, I have no idea what half the people are shouting at, if it's at me or the dude next to me or the dude, you know what I mean? And you get all of that confusion coming in. How do you streamline that to where people can still have fun with the complexity of the game, but it not, like you said, be the lag point where I have to look down, what hit me, what I'm just calling dead because I don't have time to process it, and I walk back to spawn.
Well, step one is we're going to remove magic.
Ooh. Heard it here first, folks. There's my clip, my hot clip for the episode. So, Gorvale, let's see if you can get yourself in any hotter water. It seems like in V8, in the V8 magic system, there's an exception to every rule. Will this be largely kept the same, or will we be streamlining it? We kind of talked about that a little bit, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like we were saying, like the idea of the meat space operations, but also on a big thing that we've talked about is matching people's expectations to how things should work. And so, like, if you think that something should work this way, it probably should work that way. And so things like there are some things that don't work because of balance reasons. Like, for example, like being able to take someone out of ice ball with a fireball doesn't work. and maybe it might in a physics system, but it doesn't in our system because it's either balance reason or because it's not an effect. And so some of those, like making sure that people have a decent set of expectations going into the game, and then those expectations are met on the field, is a very big part of that exception-based system that V8 has. And so, like, there are some things that are always consistent. Like, if it has the word command in the incantation, it's a command spell. But if you're immune to command, there's another thing that can stop you. And so it's like, well, now I need to know that one specific thing that if you use lightning bolt on me, I can still get stopped from that. And there's that whole interaction, which is on paper very streamlined, but once you actually have to process that on the field, might not be.
But that whole system is still light years ahead of what it was in V7, though, compared to like all the spells are in the same like wording at the first little bit of the spell. Like, out of all the things y'all did right, Cord, I think that's one of the ones that's up there the most, is streamlining that.
Well, thank you. And we do still have a ways to go on that. I agree that the exceptions process is kind of problematic, but yeah, it's so much better than it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, when we were going through our holiday homework, like, that was one of the big things. I'm like, we are keeping this. Like, keywords are so useful. Like, even if verbals take a different form, if schools take a different form, if whatever, like, having keywords that tell you what's happening when you get a spell cast on you is so helpful. Like, if it has the word stopped in it because you're getting stopped, that just makes so much sense.
Well, and it's very easy to tell new players, right? I'm playing Paladin now, and being able to extend immunities to, and I say, here's this. If they say command, just ignore it. Like, even for a first time on the field new player, that they're able to process that, where in V7, there was no way. You tell me, like, I have no idea what any of these spells are and what schools they fall into.
I think you probably hit the best example of why exceptions are kind of problematic right now is with new players, right? I'm sure you've all heard the idea that, okay, new players start. What do? Oh, tell them to play monk because they ignore what everyone's casting at you. Oh, but accept these spells that are almost the go-to spells that you're always going to have cast on you. And those are the things that act as stumbling blocks to comprehension, right? So those types of exceptions, I think, most importantly, we want to make sure we tackle.
Very fair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The new player experience. So AI had at one point an initiative that was trying to try and make a new player onboarding committee. It didn't really get off the ground, but when I was on that team, one of the big things was basically because of the way the V8 rulebook is laid out, it's harder for a new player who has no background knowledge. Like, imagine you're starting a freehold, you've never met anyone who's played Amtgard, and you just like download the PDF and you're like, okay, I got to learn this game and teach it to someone.
That would be hard.
Like, where do you start? And so one of the things that the team was going to try and do was like a new player primer. But if we can, as the V9 team, just lay out the rule book in a way that is new player friendly and make it say, hey, here's the things you should pay attention to. Here, make the chapters go in the order that you would need to learn things like that. Like, that was a big focus point of, if you don't have a support system to learn the game, how do you learn the game?
And that could even go just as simple as trying to make it look like a normal tabletop book. Right. That most of the people that are jumping into our game have played D&D at some sort or some tabletop game. Just as simple as, hey, this is going to look similar to that. I think could be a really big thing for new players. So I think I know the answer to this next one, but we'll throw it up anyway because it's fun. Cord, will rocks ever break weapons like arrows? Maybe a bolder category of a thrown weapon?
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Look, if you throw a rock, an actual rock at a weapon, it might break. Who knows? But don't do it. It's not safe.
There's another question there that says, who do I got to bribe? You're looking at us.
Yeah.
We're all on the screen.
And one blank sign check, too.
Heron's not here. Clearly got to bribe Heron.
All right, so here's another one in the same line. Let's ask the basic question that a lot of people want answered. How are Paladin and Anti-Paladin being adjusted? So let me lay this out for viewers who maybe haven't seen this before. Paladin, anti-Paladin for a very long time in our game were kind of locked behind knighthood. And the theory that I've heard floated was the classes themselves were not that good, but they were elevated because they were only being played by the best. And so now that they are opened up to everybody, Paladin, anti-Paladin needs buffed because the class was never good. It was just the people that were good. So question for you all, is that line of thinking correct? And if it is, how are Paladin and anti-Paladin being adjusted?
Before we get into this, I do want to say there is currently a proposal for V8 that you can find on the Amtgard rules clarification page if you're looking for it. It's also on Amtgardian and Boffers and Blasphemy and people share to their kingdoms. But if you're looking for the proposal by the rules reps right now, there is a proposal for how that's going to change in V8. So if you're thinking about that, like that's
V8 or V9?
Yeah, this is for V8. This is the rules rep process that's going to be happening. The Circle of Monarchs will be voting on this actually fairly soon. Once the rules reps actually vote on it to see if that passes. So just so you guys are aware, regardless of what V9 does to Paladin and anti-Paladin, there is a change coming to them that will be played this year more than likely. So you can find that. Go, like I said, Amtgard rules clarification on Facebook. Just go to there and you can find. I have it linked on there. The current what the rules reps are going to be voting on. That's not what's going to happen. That is purely they're going to vote on it soon. And if you have ideas and opinions, please tell your rules rep because they're the ones voting.
If I may, as far as V9 is concerned, I would say the main things that you can expect, and again, disclaimer, subject to change, is that we are going to try to make them have their own identities. I feel fairly strongly that we will not be deleting one or merging the two. Just because I know Cord wants it, but people become really attached to like Paragon sashes and class identity and whatnot. And even though logistically I could probably make an argument to merge like Scout and Assassin and Paladin and Anti-Paladin, and I could probably merge like Druid and Wizard if I really wanted to make an argument for it, or Healer and Druid or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. All the casters. At the end of the day, they exist as they are now, and part of the legacy of Amtgard, right, is these classes. So since a lot of people are asking for new classes, this is a great opportunity combined with the new customization options that we want to bring to all classes to really hit those power fantasies that people have been dying for. Right. And even if it's just an archetype called cleric for paladin or for healer or for whatever that lets those people finally hit that, button. I think that is more what you can expect is nicheifying each of them and not being like echo fighters, essentially.
I'm kind of annoyed that I just got so shut down right there.
I was going to say, Cord, why is he wrong?
Seriously. I mean,
you're muted, man.
I agree with Cord, so go ahead, Cord.
I feel like there's so much opportunity with regard to these two specifically if we're looking to give different classes customization options and like paths forward to say we've got the good guy, we've got the bad guy. I mean, there's just so much opportunity there that the idea of actually maintaining them as paladin and anti-paladin and then trying to figure out ways to customize those two like opposites, like that feels like we're just making more things much more difficult for ourselves. So, but we've been having this argument for how long now? I think
we may just have to put out a full survey for it, being like,
yeah, we'll have this argument for V10 too. I imagine. But
also, in my mind, there's still room to keep the identities separated, even if they don't end up as separate classes. Because if they end up as, say, archetypes of one class, then
they're not. Wouldn't you just said that?
Clearly, I don't. But like, even if, like, for example, like if you talk about making using this this customization as an opening, whether it's a thing of like we take the names Paladin and Anti-Paladin and make them archetypes of a subclass of one main class, or if we rename one of them and like if we have like there's like the paladin class, and one of the archetypes is the anti-paladin, and then we take the design space freed up by paladin and have it be its own class. Whatever it ends up being, like, there's still room to keep these identities, but at the same time, especially with paladin and anti-paladin, going back to the expectations thing, there's also an expectation not just from when people go on the field, but also what people expect Amtgard to be like. And a lot of kingdoms especially have this big cultural pomp and circumstance around paladin and anti-paladin being two sides of this coin, and every knight needs to pick like whatever it is, like and having a room for that is something that some people really enjoy about Amtgard, and we don't want to take that away.
Well, and if you were going to merge or delete any of the classes, I feel like these would be the two that you can.
Druid.
Okay, you're talking about what ones I want.
Let's talk about that.
Or what? Okay, we'll get there. We can get there. Well, I guess my point with this one is now would be the time to delete or merge paladin and anti-paladin, because there are significantly fewer paragons of it, just because for so long it was tied up. Theoretically, you have 400 paragon druids in the game or whatever. You might have 50 paragon assassin or paragon paladin or anti-paladin, just because it was. So I feel like you're gonna take a lot fewer people off if you merge them, but the people that you're going to tick off are probably going to be really ticked off.
It's the anger button, right? Because we've already triggered them by unlocking them. We then go,
put that on us. Not us.
They're also the Circle of Monarchs because they're the older players.
Yeah.
So they're the ones voting.
So Craig Minima actually brings up a really good point, and that's that we can think that the game that we put out is amazing. And, a lot of people can agree with us. But if we can't get 75% of the Circle of Monarchs to agree with that, all this work is for nothing. And so we have to make sure that we temper all of this amazing concept stuff with, what the people who are going to be in charge in like 2024 are going to be willing to accept. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind when we're developing this, is that constant, can we get the COM to accept this?
What was the percentage, do you remember, of V8 being accepted? Was it close?
There were 3 kingdoms that voted no. And I think at that time we had, was it 8?
I think it was 18.
18 kingdoms?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we were... No, I feel like we were 1 vote away from not passing.
Okay,
is how
that's close.
Ended up coming out. So
we're all 3 of those.
Because we're sitting there.
Kingdoms?
What?
We're all 3 of the no's old kingdoms. I'm just curious. You were talking about how like a lot of the people in the COM are older players who like were the no votes what we would classify as older kingdoms, or were they like newer medium kingdoms? Do you remember?
I'd probably have to go back and list. I think it was a combination. It was a little bit of a combination. Okay. But yeah. So I remember us sitting there during the actual vote. We heard no. It's like we heard the second no. It's like we heard the third no. We're like so. So yeah. It wasn't a sure thing for V8. Definitely.
I gotcha. Interesting. So let's circle back around, because you got me really excited when you said delete Druid. Can we expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, we're gonna delete Druid.
Perfect. I'll hold you to it. It's on the podcast. It's set in stone now, right?
I do want to point out that Druid's been like probably the most volatile class of version 6 to version 7 to version 8. It's actually ridiculous the power levels that it's gone through even revisions inside of them. Like V6, there was actually like, a complete change to the passives on Druid at one point. And then in V7, they changed the passives again that they had. Because at that time, some Druid actually had like immunities and things like that they had passively, as well as their spells. And their enchantments got nerfed going into V7. And then we come into V8, and it looked on paper like it was like the same as V7 almost, but man, was it not when people actually discovered how to use it. So became the most versatile class we have.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of crazy to me because Druid was my first 6th level class back in 2002, right? So it's kind of like a weird thing to like see all these versions of Druid now over the course of the years and how volatile it's been. Like that class is trash right now to, oh my God, if you're not playing Druid, you're not being competitive, you know? And it's been every version of the rules has had that like, but V8, it's always been the same. Like we have not nerfed Druid at all. I think this is the first time in a version that we've not done it. And that's actually crazy to me, at least since V6.
I was doing some research to look at the old V8 dev stuff. And like the very first V8 playtest stuff, someone's like, this Avatar of Nature thing seems pretty strong.
Little did they know.
So I just want to say, this is the nerfed version.
Oof.
Right? It was worse.
Yeah, the version only did 6th level spells.
Yeah.
Oof. I don't mind classes being very, very good in niche or specific situations because I feel like it's really fun. Yes, sir. Go for it.
Just finish your thing, and I think I'm going to wave into it.
Cool. I don't mind classes like players are playing a specific class to try and fulfill an archetype or a fantasy. And if, a scout being able to be really good against assassins, for instance, doesn't bother me at all. What I think bothered me with Druid was they were so good at everything. I don't mind if the classes have a really high power spike in certain situations, but then are lower in others. It's just if the baseline power is too high. I think that's where we're at with Druid.
Exactly that. And I think the issue with Druid and why it was so volatile through all the editions is the fantasy idea of what a Druid is has changed drastically over time, right? V6, V7 Druid, your inspiration is like D&D Druid, right? Like Radagast, like your bearded nature, type Druid. And V8's inspiration, and Cord, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems very heavily based on WoW Druid. Being able to shift from the melee damage to the enchanter to the support kind of style, right? And I think you have better class identity in the classes that in pop culture have a rooted idea. Like Wizard. Wizard is always generally the squishy glass cannon, right? And that you can see that crystallized here throughout the editions. I think another one and is in a weird way warrior, and not necessarily in how it was executed in V8, but how people want to play warrior. Because warrior is your fighter, and that goes everywhere from like samurai all the way to big, knight in armor to your juggernaut to your everything. And even in asking people like, hey, what is warrior? People that don't play warrior say one thing, and people that play warrior say something else. Right. And so trying to make sure we're aligning what people want in every class and what people are expecting, I think is important, because that also helps with comprehension. And Druid needs some reining in, and we need to say, like, this is what Druid is in Amtgard.
Mm. Cord, you looked like you had a lot to say on that.
So the first thing I have to say is I've never played WoW. So I actually don't know from that perspective. But so one of the areas where I feel like we erred with regard to Druid in particular, but some of the other classes, was we had kind of concepts for what these classes should actually be. Okay, the wizard should be kind of like the glass cannon. The druid should really be more of a backline support, handing out candy to teammates, that sort of thing. And things like Avatar of Nature were intended to be, okay, we didn't want them to be completely pigeonholed into that one thing where they had no other options. We wanted to give them a little bit of variability. And I think we went too far with Avatar of Nature because we turned it from being the backline support candy giver to the I'm going to eat all this candy and suddenly I'm going to have this, sugar rage and just, wipe the field. So, yeah.
I love it. The sugar rage leads right into my next question here. So to me, V7 was more quest based, and V8 seems more like DAG on crack. Are y'all looking to merge the best of both worlds, or looking to try a different style? So I'll rephrase this and say, how much do what other boffer games or other LARPs do, how much does that influence the decisions on what the next version of AmpGuard is going to be? Does it matter at all?
I could take a first stab at it if everyone's cool with that. So I think AmpGuard has a bit of an identity crisis right now, and this question specifically kind of points it out, in that V7 to V8 felt like a different focus as to what we cared about. And if you ask anyone across the game in different kingdoms, hey, what is AmpGuard about? You're going to get different answers based on what their local environment does. When we put out our roleplay survey, we found that there are some parks where their idea of roleplay is you're doing a battle game and one dude's a minotaur. Right? I've described it as like the zoo role play, tourist role play, where the actual players are not role playing. They go, look at that role player. Isn't that cool? He's dressed up and, being a minotaur, but I'm just going to wacky bat and, have a beer in one hand and whatever. So, and some parks, that is what they think of when we talk about role play. A quest might be kill the minotaur, right? Whereas in other places, like I'm sure if you've been in Rising Winds, Golden Vale, Nine Blades, anywhere northeast, we'll be like, let's get lost in the forest for 6 hours, right? And talk. And that's the quest up here, right? So,
talk? What? You do more talking than just casting at each other? What? Okay.
Yeah, where we actively sigh when the blender team comes by and be like, dude, we were having a conversation with this goblin. Come on. I was trying to sell him a timeshare. And because of that massive divide in how people play the game, we need to accept that AmpGuard can't be just one or just the other. And I think that our community has grown big enough and we have such a varied group of people that we don't have to necessarily pick one or the other and just say like, no, we're a roleplay game. Here's how you roleplay. No, we can say we are all of this, but we should say that right on the lid. This is everything we do. And kind of like with the GOG, lay it out, be like, these are the types of games that you can play. So someone in the tourist role play area with the Minotaur can open this book and be like, oh, hey, there's this thing called an adventure quest where it's meant to be PvE and you're meant to just go do role play stuff in the forest, and people set stuff up. Oh, that's cool. And people doing the forest role play go, oh, hey, cool. We could do a battle game where one dude's a Minotaur, right? And he's role playing, and
that takes so much less.
They don't have to be mutually exclusive, right? Those can be together. Mm-hmm. So I think AmpGuard sits in the middle of where we are right now between V7 and V8 and like immersion LARPs and DAG. And we just need to accept that. Acknowledge we are this.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? How much do other games affect? How much does another game affect AmpGuard in going into the next rulebook?
So there's this is something I was going to mention earlier, but then I never got to it. There's an economic factor to rules changes, right? So some standardization happened in V8 for like how weapons are constructed, right? And armor was a big point because some of those changes to armor completely change people's kits, right? People had kits that they paid like $100 for, and then they were worth 1 or 2 points less, or in some cases they were worth more now, right? And so that it was an actually economic change, especially since some of that armor could be used in DAG and some of it couldn't. Like Sharkmail could not be used in Dagger here for a long time. And actually, I was so happy when they approved it because I had some and I was like, sweet, I can wear this in DAG now. Those types of decisions, right, are economic decisions, not just gameplay, because the amount of people that you'll see using those things, especially if they play in multiple games, matters, right? Just like garb. Like, can I wear my garb at DAG? Yeah, I can. Thank God, having to have different garb for different types of lol $100 armor. Oh, thank you. I have food.
Hi, Kevin.
And economic impact of these types of things is important to think about, right? It's important to consider when we're talking about these types of changes, about considering other rule sets. Now, we can't consider like lightest touch LARPs because of the way our weapons hit, right? As far as like weapons construction and things like that. But they have magic systems that we can look at and see what they do well and what they don't do well, right? I've played in several of these systems, from Nero to Kanar to Orcs, which is like a version of Darkon on the East Coast. There's a lot of different those types of games that there's some things I really liked about them, some things I really didn't. But in all of them, I could wear my garb, and all of them they let me use my weapon. Thank God, right? So obviously, doing major changes to systems like that is hard for us to think about, but we obviously like cross gaming, I think, in general. And so, I would definitely advocate for us trying to make sure that we maintain that relationship by keeping the weapons at least similar. Obviously, we're not the same. Like, we cannot use the stab only dag polearms that are standard, right? Because they don't have 6 inches in the end, because we don't consider that a safety problem. The same way that we can't use our arrows in dag because they want them to be poofy, right? So there's obviously going to be those changes still. But we have to be very considerate about those types of changes, because not just because of our game, but also possibly other games, because that is part of our population.
Cord?
So I think from V7 to V8, we did actually take other games' rules into consideration to try and see what we could potentially do to get some more of that cross game activity. So shield manipulation was something that in V7, some kingdoms said, no, you can't actually touch your shield to another shield. And then Texas had a very, common phrase called rubbing his racing. Yep. That basically meant effectively that, shield, you couldn't shield bash someone, but boy, howdy, could you get up in their, business. And so we introduced the concept of shield to shield contact. As kind of a means of trying to bring us a little bit closer to some of those other games. There were changes to the weapons to try and make it clearer that dag weapons could actually be used, easily in Amtgard. So there were definitely aspects of that we brought in. And I think in V8 to V9, we're liable to do the same thing. We're actively looking at a lot of those other game systems that are similar to say, what can we steal? Because the stepped is king. If they do stuff well, and we don't do it well, why don't we incorporate that? Not only will we make things a little bit more comfortable and recognizable for people who are trying to do that cross gaming thing, but we'll also be improving our system. It's a win-win. So.
No, I get that for sure. I love cross gaming, and I definitely will buy, especially on my expensive purchases, I will buy things that I know I can use in both games. And if there's one that can't be used in both, I'm going to save and I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to maybe buy the thing that's going to be able to be used in multiple different games. That is definitely something I take into account as a consumer. So good point there. I've got one more question here and then we will wrap up. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the difficulty to play of V8 on 1 to 10? And then what is your goal on how difficult you want V9 to be in comparison?
Can we define what 1 and 10 mean here?
Sure.
Because when we take into consideration what V7 was like to V8 versus people who started in V8 going to V9, I think that scale is going to be drastically different.
Fair. Let's do 1 is you can completely understand the game on your first day out. 10, and I would put, for the most part, most of the other Boffer games on a 2 or a 3. You can understand pretty much everything in Dag Bell within a month of playing. But then on the other hand, you have someone who's maybe been playing 10 years and still doesn't fully understand all the intricacies of the game, right? So where would you put, and you can rank V7, V8, and then where you want V9 in there as well. So 1 being first time, first day out, understands all the intricacies of the game. 10 being you've been playing for 10 years and still don't fully understand all of the intricacies of the game.
So we have this concept that we've been putting forward, and that's that effectively the game itself should be simple enough that a brand new player should be able to come out and engage and understand the whole game relatively quickly. And then there's so much potential nuance that you can add to it, and different variations, etc., that it keeps people engaged for the long term. There's always something new to explore, something new to do there. So from a V8 perspective, I would say we're probably at a 6 to 7, I would think, because we came down from V7. V7, I think we were like at an 8 or 9 just because of how much you had to memorize in order to be able to play. V8, I think 6 to 7, because we did standardize some things. We made it easier. You have the ability to explain to a brand new person what they can do to get on the field, and 80% of the time they're going to be fine. And that other 20% of the time, they're going to have no clue what the heck's going on. I feel like for V9, I would want us to be in that 4 to 5 range. Okay. I don't think we necessarily would expect a brand new day one player to come out and just understand every single intricacy, but I do think we would want them to come out, and the instances where they don't understand what's going on should be a rare occurrence. And even when things are changing and the nuances applying, what they understand should still be static.
Fair. So, everyone else agree, disagree?
So my take would be that V8 is probably sitting at about an 8 right now. And this is just in my diving into surveys and in my talking to people and in my own experiences. And I would say that V7 was probably either also an 8 or even a 7. And I think what V8 clarified in what V8 streamlined, they then kind of reintroduced difficulty via a bunch of extra abilities and very complex enchantments and a lot. So they kind of like took some here and put some here, and you ended up similarly. I started playing in V7, and from the conversations I've had with others, I feel like I'm seeing more people struggle learning V8 difficulty wise than I saw with V7. So I'd say V7 was a 7 and V8 was an 8, and V9 should not be a 9. I want V9 to be like a 5, kind of like what Cord said. That with the caveat of what he just put out, where we want difficulty to be low, but we want depth to be high. And just like something like chess, you can have something be very simple, but very deep. And difficulty and depth don't need to be hand in hand.
I've been a competitive battle gamer since pretty much like the second or third year that I played Amcard. So back in, early 2000s. So V6, V7, and V8, right? Like, I've won Bridge Wars and things like that, and all versions of the game, right? And so I will say that I agree with Wonju that V8 is probably the most complex, only from the perspective of thinking about ability interactions. Because even when you think about V6, well, the abilities were a lot more, I guess, varied, right? You had some abilities that did the same thing, but they actually had different incantations. The number of actual effects that you could actually do to people in the field was actually not anywhere near where we are now. The number of effects that you have to think about and worry about, on like being able to not die when you were supposed to die, right, was not a thing before V8, except for through like a one rare ability Lich, which is like a powerful, right, like wizard ability. Whereas that is actually a thing that happens like all the time now, because Gift of Air and Undead Minion are actually pretty common in a lot of fields, and those. And even like, before we talked about armor that could, magical armor that could be ancestral, before it was pretty much just stone skin. Now you have armor that could be that way, or it could be magical armor that way. So there's a lot more interactions than the field that you have to think about, of possibilities of interactions, a lot more than V8 that I think though I think V7 and V8 were actually like, I don't know, V7 had a lot more complexity because of the fact that it still held on to a lot of that, abilities that don't know almost the same thing, but at different incantations, right? Or were different, but not different. But yeah, I think V8 is probably the most complex that I've played the game in so far. So I like it, but that's because I like complexity. But that's obviously not everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah, I think I think so because I haven't played V6 or V7, I started right when V8 started. Like the first recess I took was the one my park wrote to weed out the people that ever read the V8 playtests. Like that was exactly what I was starting. And so like in my mind, I don't think V8 is necessarily difficult to play, but I think it's difficult to like the upper limit of complexity is too high, but the floor is lower. So there's a lot of stuff to learn, but you don't necessarily need to learn all of it in order to just get on the field. But in order to get any sort of effectiveness, you need to learn all of it. Mm. And because like I said, I love the keywording, I love the standardization. If your mind doesn't work that way, it's hard. And like, I'm lucky that I started, like, my nerddom is like D&D optimization, which is like way off of the like 13, 14 on this scale, where like you don't have, like, this is a step down from that. Mm. But at the same time, you can get started with D&D by not learning any of the rules because there's someone there to walk you through it. Whereas in Amp Guard, you don't have that. And so there's that idea of like, your day one, if your skill is about day one complexity, I think Amp Guard could go lower. But I think that in terms of how the overall system is difficult, I think that there's a lot of consistency that makes it less difficult to get the whole breadth of it. But the fact that breadth is required makes it hard.
Go for it.
This is actually a really good way that we can discuss how we talked about, putting the complexity on the user or pregame. This is a way we can still keep high-end complexity for people who want it, but bury it in avenues where you don't need to deal with it unless you want it, right? You can, like, point buy is a great example, right? If you don't want to deal with point buy, you don't have to play a class that uses point buy, right? And we have had, for all the people that are saying we want complexity, we have the same amount of people saying we want less complexity, right? We want classes to stay static. I like being able to show up at field, go, this is my class here, and just memorize this, and that's it. So we can do both, which is great.
I think I fall with Cord on this one. I think V7 was more difficult, but I think it's for completely different reasons. V7 had just so many random spells that could, like, I remember, like, if you're going to do any of the wizard wall stuff or whatever, like, that's random and you don't see that too often in competitive stuff. But when you do see it, it takes, what was it, like a 4th level or higher bard to do like, there were a bunch of those random counter mechanics that if you just didn't know everything about every little rule, it was really difficult to play around in a competitive environment. And they kind of had all of the role play rules in with the battle game rules, which was kind of weird in V7. So like, what was the one that someone had to tell you the truth to one question? Like, they just had a bunch of random stuff like that in there too. And
I 100% use truth as break concentration in V7.
I like it. And so I think those were more difficult in V7. I do think I get more things cast at me, and it's more difficult in V8 for me to cognitively follow everything that's going on. But at least if I hear, Godric, I at least understand where it's going. Where in V7, I had fewer of those things being thrown at me. But if they did get thrown at me, I had no idea what it was going to do, just because there were so many options, if that makes sense. Cool. I like that question. That was a good one. Thank you, Christopher. I like that. So I'm going to close up here. Is there anything on your all's minds and hearts that you just want the audience to know before we close out? Any question that I didn't ask that you want to throw out there and kind of answer for yourselves before we close out?
Can I go first with something real quick? So something for you guys in the audience is that kind of going back to the emotion thing I appealed to at the beginning. Like, we have to navigate emotional things in this game. Understand that game designing and process can't be emotional. We can't hold on to things when we're doing our design work, right? If we as a designers have a specific thing that we're like, if this doesn't go in, I'm quitting, then we shouldn't be doing the design work, right? Because like, that's not how this works. You have to think about this almost from like an engineering perspective, right? You're like, we need to engineer a thing to fix, this thing we're designing. This is wrong. We need to fix this thing. Everybody throw your ideas on the table. We can't take an idea and ridicule them. We can't take an idea and say, I can't believe you even suggested that. You just explain to them why it was a bad idea and be like, oh, okay. And then you as a person that put the idea forward, be like, oh yeah, that was bad. And that is okay, right? And so these are the types of things you guys have to understand when you guys start seeing rules ideas, when you start seeing the new rule book coming out, that obviously we're not going to be perfect. And you shouldn't expect perfection, especially at first. So please temper your expectations, because you want to think about this as also, if you're going to help us and give feedback, think about it from a designer perspective. Tell us what you think is wrong and why it's wrong, and try not to put so much emotion into it. Think about it logically and point it out in a way that we will accept it, because we are also emotional beings, not just you. So if you put it in a way that is going to be bad, it's going to be hard for us to accept your feedback, even if it's good. So just FYI.
Good point.
I think at the same time also, like, if something sucks, like, we want to know that. Don't be like, oh, I don't want to give bad feedback because, like, I don't think they're gonna like that I have this feedback and they're not gonna listen to me because it's negative. Like, no, we want to hear what's broken because we don't want the game to be broken. So at the same time, there's like both.
Like what Cord said earlier on, I think we're incredibly blessed to have the team that we have and have the ability to talk with each other and put out these ideas and throw out some crazy crap and then have some other people go, no, that's stupid, or no, that's crazy. And not get offended. Like, we're not attacking each other. We're throwing ideas out and we're pointing out like, yeah, this probably isn't the best. And no one is taking it to heart. And that is so important, not only for just progress, but for morale and being able to work at this as a team and not become like a political situation where everyone's just trying to get in their stuff before we seal it and send it off to be voted on. So I'm very, very honored to be working with Gorvan, Manama, Cord, and Heron, who is not here today. Hi, Heron, if you're watching this later. That is not what I wanted to say. So I'll take the opportunity to say what I wanted to say, which was, if you are watching this, thank you for watching this. But there are so many people, especially during this pandemic, that aren't even aware V9 is under works, right? So there are people who have just kind of checked out from AmpGuard during the pandemic when their field is closed. There are people who are not social media inclined, people who've already left Facebook, because like we mentioned earlier, it is a sinking ship. If you know people who would care about this and who want to be involved and who would want to have an opinion, please point them to ampguard.com/V9. We specifically set up that website so it is not connected to Facebook and you can check it out all the time. If they need any sort of accommodation to engage with us, such as voice conversation, if they just want to chat with us, reach out to us. We can make that happen. I'm not kidding when I say I have had people message me being like, hey, I've got some cool ideas. Can I share them with you? And not only will they send me a document that we keep in our archive of outside submitted stuff, but I'll drive home from work and just like randomly call them on a Discord call, be like, hey, would you like to just chat and share with me your ideas? And I will just talk with them just to get the root of what they're, trying to say that maybe they might not have been able to crystallize in an article. Right. And I think that is very important because as you can see here with this collection, we're all very, I don't want to say like min-maxers and power gamers, but like we're the people that thrive in the online text-based environment tend to skew towards a type of individual. Mm-hmm. And that is not the entire scope of AmpGuard. And we want to make sure we are getting the feedback from as many people as possible so we can write this game for everyone. So if you know those people, get them in touch with us.
I like it. Cord, any parting thoughts, any ideas I didn't touch on you want to get out there before we close out?
I think I'm going to go ahead and let One Joe close it out with that comment. I think that was a good closer, so we'll stop.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you spending the time coming on and just spending your evening with us, answering my questions, answering the community's questions. Really, really means the world to me. I appreciate you guys for doing that. So viewers, if you have stuck it out with us for an hour and 42 minutes exactly, we appreciate you a whole lot as well. This is the archive, a hopefully weekly, if I can keep it up, LARP related podcast. If you're seeing this for the first time, please consider hitting that like and subscribe. It does mean the world and help the channel out. I am Saint Godric. We've got One Joe. We've got Manama, we've got Cord, we've got Gorovan, and we've got Heron, who wasn't here, but was here in spirit. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.